welcome here. So you have them from all walks of life and from every region in India. So that would also be nice for the discussion also to compare what you see happening for Tamil Nadu. And maybe also you can reflect a little bit on what's happening in the whole of India and where is then the position of Tamil Nadu. I know that Apple wants to make all its phones here in Tamil Nadu, as far as I know. But I mean, so Tamil Nadu is apparently also one of the most, strong states, economy-wise, in India. But maybe also you can reflect a bit on the differences with the other parts of India and how you see also maybe the political developments, how it all interconnects, and where do you see it going for the next 2 years, and where we, as a Dutch network, could, see our opportunities to connect with Tamil Nadu economically. And then for economy, for us is innovation, it's agriculture, it's water, it's health. That are the 4 focus areas where we are focusing on. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
First, thank you very much to my good friend, the Honorary Consul, to the Chief Economic Council, to all of you. And I'm very happy to be here. I think it might be the first big gathering I'm addressing after taking over my new portfolio. So maybe it's an apt time for me to also reflect on a few things. Since all of you have some experience in India, I won't go into the kind of India story, but I will try and make a distinction at the outset. What I think the strengths of Tamil Nadu are, and maybe what some of our limitations in the recent past are. Because our strengths are actually more than a century old. What separates us from most of the country, and just statistically, maybe I should just lay the template. If you look at India, there are 4 large, well-to-do, relatively developed states in India. That's Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and Karnataka. There are small, well-developed states. There are large, not developed states. But large, developed states, there are only 4. These are the large net contributors to the national exchequer, tax-wise, revenue-wise, and where the bulk of the economic activity happens. I think Maharashtra maybe 15-16% of the national GDP. Tamil Nadu will be about 10, 11. Gujarat roughly the same. Karnataka, in the ballpark. So between the 4 of us, we're probably 45-50% of the GDP of the country. What makes Tamil Nadu unique, even among these 4, is the kind of equitable distribution and participatory economy that we have. Relatively speaking, our Gini coefficient is about 10% lower than the other rich states. Relatively speaking, the penetration of education, of access to health, of access to infrastructure, of urbanization. We are almost 50% urbanized state. No other state in India is, or at least large state, is of that scale. And all these are the consequences of over 100 years of a particular approach to development. Much more inclusive, one driven by social justice, one driven by education as the basis for growth. So back in 1920s, under the bicameral administration developed by the British called diarchy, legislation to provide compulsory education or to require compulsory education for boys and girls was enacted in 1921. So that's how far back, it's more than 100 years. So the good news is that, we have the human capital infrastructure in place better than most places, most states, and definitely the national average. Additionally, our location, our history, our culture has been always kind of global. A lot of seafaring, a lot of trade. We have excavated now in a place near Madurai called Kiladi, and even further south in Tirunelveli, coins that are, 800, 600 BC trade with the Roman Empire and so forth. So, we were always a kind of globally focused society, or outward looking and willing to transact and in fact in some cases conquer. As you may know, during the Chola period, the kingdom stretched all the way Java, Sumatra, Kedah, all the way to large parts of Indochina. Of course, geographically, we're blessed with a coastline, with a lot of sunshine, with a lot of wind. So from an energy perspective also, we're in a very fortunate position. And lastly, I would say because we have been relatively well-to-do for decades, our infrastructure at least at the basic level in terms of roads per square kilometer, number of airports, logistics hubs, things like that, is better than most places. That's the good news. I must say that nothing comes, all positive. Some of the negatives we've had, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, the administration has been beset by political uncertainty, by some kind of litigation and some other situations, by the death of two of the senior leaders who had otherwise been the tallest for 30 years or so. And so a lot of this uncertainty, the lack of clear political mandates and leadership leads to a lot of policy paralysis. That's the lesson I take away. And so what had been a pioneering initiative in Tamil Nadu of the notion of creating a separate department for information technology, starting out with tidal parks and these kinds of shared investments in IT, ITES, we have fallen very far behind. So if you compare us to Bangalore or Hyderabad, or even in some cases Mumbai, we are very much underweight our potential in the sense that what such industries really need is human capital, class A office space and access to ports, airports, and a decent quality of life. We should have all of that ready-made, and relatively we have still fallen further behind our competitors. In the last, we started out compatible or equal, and then we started falling further and further behind. Part of that, I think, is, as I say, the political scenario, the lack of steady leadership, the lack of continuity in some cases. Part of that is that we don't do very well in terms of, the core responsibilities of government. The government itself was running hugely revenue and fiscal deficits, so our investment in infrastructure dropped. We didn't keep up. Our ability to do incentives for industries fell behind because of our fiscal woes. And in fact, ease of doing business slowed, I would say aggressively slowed. And in my, benchmark, the Gujarat of the former chief minister, current prime minister, was probably the case study for ease of doing business. There may be many other negatives for it. I'm not here to talk politics. But from the ease of doing business perspective, that was certainly, one of the kind of high watermarks of how easy it was to get something started, how well the red tape was unraveled or cut. And therefore, the acceleration of growth, just to give you a comparison, in 2011, we were about 11% of the country's manufacturing, and Gujarat was about 9. By 16, Gujarat had become 11 and we had become about 9. So basically, the scale had changed dramatically. And part of that, of course, was a different type of industry. Tamil Nadu has a lot more MSMEs, has a lot more manpower-intensive industries, and Gujarat has a lot more capex-intensive industries and a lot less MSMEs. So we're actually two substantively different economies if you compare Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So we are where we are. I would say that from a fiscal perspective, we have corrected much of the errors of the last 7 years within the last 2 years that I was in the seat. We are within the compliance level of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is 3% GSDP, which should be our fiscal deficit. We are still not quite out of the woods. We are running about 1% revenue deficit, which needs to be eliminated, which will then free us up to do that much more, 1% more capex into our infrastructure and joint ventures and PPP. I announced just before I changed portfolio that we would set up a PPP policy in terms of framework in which we could work with people, because clearly, no matter the part of the economic cycle we're in, there are structural imbalances. People, countries like India, are always in need of capital. We got probably 30 years worth of big investment demand, as well as countries like Australia, Canada, the oil-rich countries, potentially even Netherlands. I'm sorry, I don't know as much about your economy, where there's a huge surplus because of the aging population and the historical, wealth, either from resources or from trade. And so there's big investable pools of capital, in these countries, and they're always looking for long-term investments, duration assets, in the context of the global markets being quite volatile and interest rates basically being at unprecedented kind of levels. So, the dearth of stable 30-year bonds, shall I say, has driven a lot of that capital into infrastructure, 30-year, 20-year infrastructure projects. And that is actually a prime space for India in general, Tamil Nadu in particular. But moving more to my current portfolio, I think the great luxury of this portfolio it's called Information Technology and Digital Services. On the one hand, it is a transformative portfolio. We are in the middle of doing some very exciting things. We're laying fiber to even the remotest villages of Tamil Nadu under a project called BharatNet. We are probably restructuring our cable TV, government cable TV enterprise, to do things like bundling of data plus VoIP plus TV, like the West has done, and probably make that a transformative, both social justice in terms of access for all to high speed, as well as inclusive to the remote rural areas. We are transforming the process of government to make it much more transparent. We have something called the Tamil Nadu e-governance agency, and we're trying to move as many of citizen services online, including, we have announced from April 1st, all tenders, all government contracts and bids will now be only online, and make it more open to everybody, rather than, it's easier to rig a physical system and much harder to rig an electronic system. So there's still a bit of transformation going on, but where the real room for us, I think, is in trying to catch up with our counterparts in particularly in Bangalore and Hyderabad, not just in Chennai, but in places like Hosur and Coimbatore and Madurai and stuff like that, where really human capital is the core resource for this industry, for innovation, for technology, for IT-enabled services. It's really about human capital. And the great luxury we've had of 100 years of this kind of inclusive education-based growth has left us with a lot of educated young people. Just for benchmarking, the gross enrollment ratio in tertiary education in Tamil Nadu is above 50%. That means more than 1 in 2 people go into some higher education in Tamil Nadu. The national average is around 25%. And the second highest state after us, Kerala, is about 32%. So we are in a league of our own. Not all of them are great colleges. Not all of them are, putting people out directly employable. But in terms of, and I would put it a slightly different way, something like 88% or higher of girls the age of 18 have finished high school in Tamil Nadu. Now you compare that to even a state like Gujarat, which is an advanced state, the number is less than 50%. So we have huge participation of women in the workforce. There are many, many MSME owners that are women. There was a recent study that showed that 40% of all women who work in the manufacturing industry are based in Tamil Nadu. That's a remarkable statistic, partly driven by the phone manufacturers and the electronic industry and the leather and non-leather footwear industry, which are huge employers of women. But still, for 6.5% of the population, having 40% of the women engaged in manufacturing, talks a little bit about our unique talent pool and the breadth of it. So I think the last word I would say is really it's incumbent on us to make it much easier to do business, to bring transparency and speed of execution to people who are looking to do cross-border action. The global economic slowdown, which is a very high possibility, will be bad for us in some ways, but also will bring us opportunities in terms of large tech companies, which never used to be cost sensitive before, have started to become cost sensitive. I mean, people like Apple and Google didn't really care. Their profit margins were so high. They didn't really care about the cost basis. That's changing a bit. For the first time, as you've seen, there's been massive layoffs in those companies as well. There's a big shift. My friend and very intense competitor, KTR, has been on a tour of the US the last week or 10 days, and every day he announces another 5 or 10,000 jobs going to Hyderabad. Yesterday was State Street, an old client of mine from my investment banking days. We are talking to Bank of New York Mellon, which is, a close competitor. So, the more KTR does, the better for a country. But, we think we can also now up our game to play in that league, which we haven't been, to be honest. And one other great luxury we have, the final word I'll say, is that there is a huge Tamil diaspora, particularly in the tech industry, particularly in the financial services industry. And as you know, the financial service industry is one of the biggest employers of tech and innovation, whether it's fintech or just core analytics or processing or money, anti-money laundering or any of these things. Huge employer of people in the tech industry. And my own experience over 15 years or so in that industry was that tens of thousands of jobs were created in India for such firms. So I think, you put all those pieces together. We're starting from a very low base, starting way behind where we should be. But in some ways, it's a very exciting opportunity because of all the reasons I said, the connectivity, the fact that we have the human capital. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that now, you can work from anywhere. And so most people would prefer to work from their homes or close to their families or to their societies. And I think that's a big advantage we have because the talent is sourced from here. And in fact, during the pandemic, we discovered quite the extent of Tamil techies in Bangalore because you had to get passes to cross state borders. And only then we realized how much of the Bangalore talent was actually originating from Tamil Nadu. So maybe I'll stop there.
First remark and question. I'm very glad to hear that the female labor participation in Tamil Nadu is very high. I had a meeting with the World Bank a month ago. It was about the economic position and development of India as such. One of the big impediments, we have a lot of challenges in the country, economically speaking, but one of the big impediments for India to get its growth up above the 7-8% line is the female labor participation. In India, it's about 25%, and if we want to grow from this 6, 7 to 8 and beyond, we need at least 50% of the women to participate in the labor process and in the market. So when I hear 40% already, then that is a promise for the future, right? And then the other one is there is a huge demographic dividend here. That's the second thing, which I think is very positive for the future economic development, and probably you will bypass KTR for sure then. And also, if we look at the economic successes of the Netherlands, it's mainly based on our large MSME sector, right? Capital-intensive sectors is nice, but it doesn't produce so much employment. So I think you have three ingredients here, which gives a lot of hope for the future. And then, talk for the next 3 to 5 years. Would you agree or?
I completely agree. I think, in fact, I'll give you another statistic. Continuously, we have a higher than 100% credit to deposit ratio in all the banks. I used to be involved in because it's a largely nationalized industry, the banking industry, there's all these mechanisms, coordination with government and so forth. But I took it very seriously as part of my job as finance minister. and there's continuously higher than 100% credit deposit ratio, which implies that money deposited in the banks in other states is actually being deployed in Tamil Nadu. When you compare that to a state like Uttar Pradesh, the credit deposit ratio is not even 50%. For every rupee deposited, 50 paisa is being invested somewhere else. So that's a huge negative to them. It's not good for the country as a whole, but this fact that there's so many MSMEs, the fact that there's so many entrepreneurs, the fact that there is therefore a credit history and a reasonable likelihood of modeling risk and return is indicative of that. Now, there are other states where the CD ratio is very high, like Andhra Pradesh, where it's like 145, 135%, but also based on a very low deposit base because of the high Gini coefficient. There are not a lot of people depositing money. So in Tamil Nadu, we have this one aspect, and also because of the lower Gini coefficient, the per capita consumption is very high relative to the rest of India. So we have a natural market here in terms of consumer goods and possibly services. So I think the ingredients are all in place, and really it's a question of ease of doing business, removal of a lot of the barriers, and transparency, getting people the comfort level. I must admit, at least the high-end IT and those kinds of jobs, it also has a lot to do with the quality of life. The quality of life is not just whether you have a decent housing market or access to water or power or nature, but in terms of social and cultural activities, we are far behind, I think. To be honest, the nightlife in Chennai, for example, is not of the caliber of Hyderabad or Bangalore, let alone Mumbai. So these are some of the things that we have to decide: are we really that cosmopolitan a society? And if so, then we got to adapt our models to suit that. This is something we've been talking about a bit for a long time, much more, a lot for a short time, and hopefully it's near fruition, where we can bring in the kind of cultural events and the nightlife and those kinds of things that make it attractive for expatriates and for young people who are aspirational to want to settle here. I think these are the weak spots that we need to fix. But the core, as you say, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the high school graduation rates, there are more girls than boys graduating high school. Absolute number. I'm not, even the population is slightly more female in most parts than male. In my constituency, there are more female voters than there are male voters. This is very different from places in the north where the sex ratio is skewed significantly the other way. So, we have all the building blocks. We're in a good place. Now we have to actually deliver and execute.
Good morning. I'm the Innovation Counselor, and thank you for these great insights and to hear about the ambitions of Tamil Nadu. On previous visits when we were here, we also heard about some concrete plans to get thought leaders, investments, new technology and innovation companies to the state. And one idea that I was quite interested about is these technology hubs. I think they were called ITNTs. And also this year we saw the first edition of Imagine, also this flagship event. But I was wondering how with these ITNTs, if the plans are still on the table and also what is happening there. Because I believe there was one plan for Chennai, but also there were ideas of talking and investing in Madurai and other places in the state to get more technology, kind of regions where investments and innovation companies would be able to settle.
As you participated in the Imagine, I think it was a flagship event. We had never done anything of that scale before. We got a lot of interesting leads and events from that, or continuity from that. About a week, no, on the 15th of May, so about 9 days ago, the first ITNT hub was actually declared open at the Anna University campus by the Chief Minister. We've been working on that for a long time. It's a bit of an ironic twist that the CEO of that hub was somebody that I referred when I was finance minister. I referred him to the IT minister, and they found him to be suitable because he had a lot of startup experience, and they didn't know him from before. So I'm happy to be reunited with Vijay Anand, who I referred. I think this is going to be replicatable experience. You know, we want to get a bit of momentum out of this one, and we'll definitely replicate them in other places, in Madurai, in Salem, in Tirunelveli. There's enough talent in all these places that really wants to come back. In fact, I'm quite surprised when I look at many of the big companies, just to name a few, JSW and Adani. The top management are all from the Thoothukudi region, right? All the Indian guys who run it. I'm not saying only in India, even in Singapore and other places, are all from one particular place. So there's definitely potential. I must confess, I've only been in the job for about 10 days, and I still had a lot of handover responsibilities because I had 4 or 5 portfolios in my old, post. So I haven't really had a big formal review of my department, partly because of my issues, partly because my secretary has been traveling overseas. He only returns tomorrow. So only day after we've actually scheduled, no, he returns today, and only tomorrow we've scheduled the first formal review. But definitely, I think these are all easy ways for us to increase connectivity, increase exposure, increase the likelihood of something clicking is these kinds of events and these kinds of hubs. And in a state where, there's been a lot of red tape and other problems, rent seeking and other problems, these hubs should eliminate a lot of those frictions and smoothen talent to actually achieve its potential.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm almost jealous. I mean, it must be very exciting to work in these days in this state. It's very nice. Thank you for your reflections. Agricultural Councillor, so it is about agriculture, but it's more about, I mean, what I hear you say is a lot about the urban side of Tamil Nadu. It's about glass fiber, for example. Now, there is also in Tamil Nadu a huge rural population. The gender issue is there, many women working there. There's smart tech in agriculture. How, maybe some ideas that you might have some ideas on how to connect the rural to this booming urban situation. Thank you.
That's a very good question. I'd say the good news first, and then I'll tell you some of the challenges. The good news is, much like every other city in India, Tamil Nadu has 100% penetration of fiber in the urban areas. So, just to give you context, when I came back from the US as an expatriate in 2006, the height of connectivity was a 1 Mbps DSL line in the heart of Chennai. It was not available, throughout Chennai. Now I can get, 300, 400 Mbps fiber in my house. Happen to have more than one house, in any house, and in Madurai. So, but that's not, it's probably better fiber network in Tamil Nadu cities than other state cities, but all cities are 100% penetration because by now even the 5G speeds are probably like 20, 30, 50 50 Mbps. The big difference is that we have almost 75 penetration of smartphone and cell towers in rural Tamil Nadu. That's quite unique to other states. I think other than places like Himachal Pradesh, which are much higher for various historical reasons and being tiny in size. No other large state has that kind of 5G penetration or 4G penetration in the rural areas. The project I was talking about was only for the rural areas. The BharatNet is not for the urban areas. That's already done. The commercial providers do that. The state is only doing the rural area connectivity. So we hope to do the bulk of rural areas in the next year or maybe 18 months. That's the connectivity piece. The agriculture piece, I must confess that I myself have been quite disappointed in the sense that though we have premier research institutions, the agricultural universities, and in fact many of our top IAS officers in the country come from the agricultural universities of Madurai and Coimbatore, the extent to which the available technology has been adopted or the facilitation has been done to the last mile of the farming community is actually quite poor. And as finance minister, I was pushing very hard for a clear database first of who are all the farmers, where are they farming, what are they farming, What all benefits are we giving them in terms of subsidies or insurance or connectivity to futures platforms? Because my instinct, which is again, it's not specific to any one government, my instinct as a large landowner myself, ancestrally, my instinct is that the bulk of the benefits are going to very few people, and the bulk of the people are getting very few benefits. That's the sad situation. And in a lot of places, this is true. It's not just a problem in Tamil Nadu, it's true across the country. But we ought to be better. And for example, I will confess that I think Karnataka does a better job than us because they have this integrated database where in one database you can go all the way from the land record to, you have, in our country, you have something called Adangal. You have to register what you've planted to get benefits. From there to the subsidies, to the insurance, to the access to the futures trade, all of that is in one database. And if you do that, the first thing you do is reduce the leakage in the pipeline by probably more than 50%. And we spend a lot on agriculture, a lot. Maybe, in a budget of X interest payments and debt, in a budget of, let's say, 3 lakh crores or 3 trillion rupees, probably, between subsidies hidden here, there, and power and all that, it's probably 20,000 crores, a good 6% or something is in agriculture. But a lot of it is wasted, inefficient, and wrongly calculated. For example, we provide free power to farmers, but we are not actually giving it to farmers, right? I mean, I've mentioned this on the floor of the House, that when we do the analysis, we find somebody who owns like 0.1 acre is running a 50 horsepower motor 24 hours a day, including when there's no seed in the ground, right? So they're clearly running hotels or colleges or whatever it is with this. So, from my old job, I'll say that we are highly inefficient. From my new role, I will say that this translation of available technology, whether it is, micro automation for transplanting and things like that, which has actually evolved quite a bit from a decade ago when I was still actively engaged in my own land, which I've lost connectivity with, to drone planting, to spraying, to optimization of fertilizer. The technology exists. I've seen demonstrations, and we have good models of facilitating FPOs, of cold storage in a shared capacity, etc. But if the goal, and really the only goal ought to be, in my view, the goal ought to be to make small farming economically viable. It's a very simple goal. If you make, every small farmer capable of making a decent living, then, of course it requires a lot to get there. But as long as we all agree that is the goal, then there's very clear paths of how to get from here to there. But in fact, there's a lot of deterrents put into the system because a lot of vested interests benefit from the broken system. But there's huge upside. The ratio of retail price to farm sale is perversely high. Is maybe 5x, 8x. There's something profoundly wrong in the system. There's a lot we have to do. I'm not sure I will be able to break the logjam as the IT minister when I couldn't do it as a finance minister, but I acknowledge there's a lot to do.
Good morning, Honorary, now I even say it myself. Consul General for South India, based in Bangalore, but also covering Tamil Nadu. I actually have two questions. I'll try to pose them quickly. India has the ability to compete on a world scale on services level, especially in IT. Tamil Nadu also has this manufacturing base that is lacking in most of India. How do you see that could play a role in the future, also looking at companies divesting from China? What is your view that Tamil Nadu, the role Tamil Nadu could play? And my second question, in the Netherlands, of course, we're looking towards an economy for the future. Hydrogen, green hydrogen plays a big role in it. I know Tamil Nadu has big plans for offshore wind farming, also hydrogen. I know it's not your direct responsibility, but if you could say something about this. Thanks.
I'll say very quickly, we are happy that we have the manufacturing base and not the kind of non-labor manufacturing that happens in Gujarat, let's say, like refineries and things like that. We actually have auto manufacturing and other fabrications, electronics, things like which are relatively labor intensive. The problem with manufacturing, as you know, is that between intent and outcome is probably 18 months to 2 years. And that's assuming you have access to the land and it takes a lot to set the factory up, get it going, hire the people, train them, etc. So that kind of lead time is there. I think we have a lot of projects in the pipeline. We hope that they'll come to fruition. The luxury of having existing bases like Hyundai is now expanding its plant. Apple will expand. The Tatas are expanding. The shoe industry is expanding. So having somebody here is easier. They know what they're doing. They can expand. Altogether, greenfield, first-time investors, the lead time is quite high. So we hope that it'll work out, but there's a lead time. The second question, we've already, I think, signed 3 MOUs for green hydrogen. All at relatively big scales, like subsidies of $1 billion plus for 3 different companies, where we're doing vast amounts of solar converted to green hydrogen. I think in one case it may be even green ammonia, basically as storage. But till we see a couple of them come to fruition, it's hard to say, right? It's a promising technology. We have provided the incentives for it, like over a 20-year period, the subsidy. Let's see how it works out. And offshore wind, we're waiting for the government of India because the government of India has to first set the policy. They've run some potential tender without actually framing the policy. So it's a bit, we are constrained because it's offshore. It's their regulation first, and we have to follow after that.
Good morning. My name is Amlan Dora. Excellency, personally, it is such a welcome change for me to hear from a politician who doesn't sound like one. And no wonder, given your background. My question relates to somewhere with ease of doing business. When it comes to investment in a state and then ease of doing business makes very much sense. I see pretty much every state welcoming foreign companies with open arms. But that's not the only interface, of course, we have. Our foreign companies, our companies, Dutch companies, or any other foreign company would also like to do business with the state where we are offering solutions. And there we find it quite difficulty. And to make it very objective, the difficulty predominantly comes from the L1 versus the quality debate. There's quite a conflict, because on one side, India talks about aspirationally becoming the global manufacturing leader and also providing the best of the services, but then L1 kind of doesn't fit into that. As the government of Tamil Nadu, how do you see this going forward, the debate between L1 versus quality?
Let me listen to the second question because that's a question close to my heart, so I might speak for 2-3 minutes on it. Let me listen to the other question and answer that first. There was one more, somebody else was.
Thank you, Minister, for your time. My name is Arun, and I represent the Netherlands Education Support Office. I just have one question. I'll make it quick. So I hope you all will agree with me that the AI is slowly taking over and replacing some of the so-called soft jobs in IT and associated sectors. And we are not sure about what kind of jobs will exist in the next 5, 10 years or 15 years. So being from the education, I'm curious to know how, as a minister or from the ministry, you're trying to bridge the gap between the academy and industry, or is there any joint initiatives between the education industry and the IT ministry to bridge this gap and the initiatives? I'd like to know. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, there's nothing right now, but I will say one thing that's already in progress and one that I had decided to do. One is that the CM has this PET program for reskilling or upskilling called Nan Mudalvan, which was the gap that we thought between the college graduates and what the industry needed. We could see a clear gap. So it's very rare to find a market that's broken in both sides, right? Either you have too many people and too few jobs, or you have, too many jobs and too few people. Here we have too many unfilled jobs and too many people without a job. So we realized there was something broken in the market. There's a project driven out of the CM's office to do upskilling and reskilling and counseling at the school level and so forth to try and move people into the right professions, into the right kind of skills, into the in the near future. You have to catch them young. The part of the problem is that for us, we have a structural problem. The pace of enrollment in higher education has jumped so exponentially high in so little time that most of these young people don't have a college graduate or a professional in their family to advise them what to do or how to do it. So, we got some unique structural problems. I won't even go into things like AI. I'd say broadly the market is inefficient and we're trying to fix those inefficiencies. Going back to your question about government services. So as long as I was finance minister, one of the key ambitions for me was to transform the way we did business as a government. There was so much inefficiency there. I've given you one example on the agriculture. So back in October, November 2021, I attended a CII-sponsored event to encourage startups, and I realized there were so many technologies that we could use as a government. And so I brought in two innovations at that time. The first I said is that for innovative companies, tenders up to 50 lakhs would not have to go through a bid process. We could just do it directly because they had a unique solution that nobody else would do. And the second is that, so we gave them an exemption from the Transparency in Tenders Act. The second is that we ran proactive days. So every department of the government of Tamil Nadu was required to run a sell to government day. And they were advertising it on the internet. Some 300 or 400 companies would sign up, startup companies would sign up. Some 50 or 60 of these would be selected. They'd have a kind of beauty contest like one day where they'd come and pitch. And whichever of those the government could immediately use, basically we would sign up with them. So this is at a small, because it was a win-win-win. It was the best outcome for the government. It was validation of the technology, and it was encouragement financially of the startup that we thought would then grow and create jobs and all. But one of the last things I did when I was finance minister, I announced that for any project that requires high levels of integration across the state, thousands of point of sale equivalent, like the public distribution system where we're checking everybody's fingerprint. Any system that has these characteristics that requires mass usage or application, thousands of points, endpoints, integration into the state data center, and some kind of what can I say, cyber security concern. All of these should not be bid on price alone. They should be bid on a QCBS, quality first. There was a lot of pushback. I don't want you understand what the pushback is from. Huge amount of pushback. I was not quite able to get that language into the government policy, though I fought very hard for it. They gave me 1,000 excuses this way, that way, that way. But I left with the public announcement that whenever there are large-scale, data-based, widespread kind of cyber security risk applications, for example, in the alcohol, in the TASMAC business, or in the public distribution system, or in the voter ID management. All of these, I said, should only be bid taking into consideration the quality of the bidder first. In fact, informally, what I used to say was that I want a minimum of a TCS or a Infosys or a Wipro, because they're public companies, they have a track record, they have a reputation to protect, they get access to insurance. And, for all these reasons, I only wanted companies like that to bid contracts of a certain complexity. I didn't want any kind of backdoor entrance. I was not quite successful in getting that implemented, but the problem is on my mind. I might be able to do something about it in my new role, because after April 1st, we've gone to, this fiscal year, we've gone to 100% e-tenders. And the risk, of course, if you're an e-tender and you have a broken or less than compliant process, is you leave behind electronic records that can come and haunt you if you were to be investigated, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years down the road. So with that as the leverage and the hope that the e-tender rule will not be undone, I think there's things I can do in my new portfolio that will make it better more transparent, and more room for quality bidders at an international, been there, done that scale to come and help us transform and run our government and our services better. Just want to make one pitch, if you don't mind. The Chief Minister has announced that in January 2024, we're going to hold a Global Investor Summit in Chennai. This is our path to 1 trillion vision that he has along that lines. And so, I would encourage you, any of you who have either, connectivity or yourself or through, your offices in facilitating or being trade promotion people to, to consider participating in that in some way. And ahead of time, we can start connecting you. Though I'm not the Minister for Industries and Investment Promotion, the gentleman who's in the seat is a good friend of mine. In fact, a junior of mine in a different role. And also the new incumbent who sits on the firm, what is it called? Guidance Tamil Nadu, which is the facilitation agency, is a junior of mine from the same university. So, I can certainly facilitate the connection if you want to get started right away to look at those things.
You, as a token of our appreciation, thank you so much.